African leaders at the AU summit agree to end conflicts, displacement and militancy. Algeria's ruling party picks incumbent Bouteflika as the candidate in the upcoming April election. And in South Sudan, warring armed groups are in the process of turning into a unified army. Hello everyone, welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. Me, Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. We'll bring you the details on those stories in just a moment, but first, Uche Okoronkwo with the day's business headlines. Uche.
Thank you, Beatrice. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. Kenya joins the ranks of leading global tea exporters. And South Africa's power supply troubles deepen as Eskom announces further load shedding. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, back to you, Beatrice.
Uche, thank you. And we begin the hour in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa, where the African Union Heads of State Summit has concluded. Calls have been made for an end to forced displacements and durable solutions to the refugee situation on the continent. The leaders have also agreed to scale up efforts of combating the threat of terrorism in the Sahel and the Lake Chad regions and the continent at large. They have also committed to supporting peacekeeping missions and operationalization of the Africa Humanitarian Agency. These are some of the issues that will top Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's tenure as the chairman of the continental body. El-Sisi took over the rotating seat from Rwanda's Paul Kagame. Let's get you the latest on the summit. I'm joined from Addis Ababa by CGTN's Girum Chala. Girum, as African leaders wrap up their summit today, what are some of the resolutions that are coming out of the summit?
Beatrice, the 2 days summit has concluded as we speak, and there are important decisions made, of course, based on the theme itself, refugees, returns and internally displaced people. Important decisions which we're going to disclose have been made, but the major focus was on area of peace and security.
Apologies for that. We will return to Girum Chala if we can. Now, members of the African Union have commended the China-Africa cooperation and its contribution to peace and security at the African Union Summit. The chairperson of the African Union Commission, Musa Faki Mahamat, has praised the remarkable success of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation held in Beijing in September of 2018 and the opening of an African Union office in Beijing. Mahamat says both events have immensely strengthened the partnership between China and the African Union. Other African leaders present at the summit also expressed their gratitude to the Chinese government for its efforts in promoting peace and security in Africa.
We really appreciate the cooperation that we're having from China, having had put up the FOCAC framework from which quite a good number of these programs can be implemented from. And without peace, there will be no development. So we thank the Chinese government, first of all, to most of the support that it is giving our sector in particular in peace and security.
Well, let's return to the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa and to Girum Chala. Girum, there has been a raft of issues, though, discussed at the summit. Have they been appropriately thrashed out, and are there solutions to some of the issues that have come out of those discussions?
So, Beatrice, most of the resolutions out of the closing ceremony that we have heard are really concerned with the peace and security situation of the continent. As you know, the theme itself, talking about refugees, returnees, and internally displaced people, if you trace the problem, the solution can also be found in there of mitigating the conflict situation of the continent. First decision, the African Union has agreed that they need to find funding from across the continent and using partners to implement the South Sudanese peace process. There are so many South Sudanese refugees, and if peace can return back to the country, and the economy can move, then that's one solution. So the African Union has decided, let's just make this peaceful situation happen by putting it on the ground. So funding is necessary. Assignment has been given to different stakeholders. We shall see if that's going to be implemented anytime soon. On the second situation in Libya, the other troublesome country at the moment, the African Union has decided to hold some kind of stakeholder meeting, but before that it's going to be the UN and the AU to come together and decide what to do next, so that this inclusive Libyan stakeholders inclusive conference can take place for peace again, so that the country can return to normalcy. On other sectors, including the reform, there are many reports that we have heard on governance and other issues, but we can say that really the leaders have taken their time to deliberate on the agenda items on their tables.
Girum Chala for us there at the African Union headquarters in Ethiopia. And now that Egypt has formally taken over the chairmanship of the African Union for 2019, the step has been greatly celebrated back home in Egypt. Cairo feels responsible to boost Pan-African cooperation in all fields. The African Union post is considered a coronation for Egypt's new foreign policy towards Africa established in 2014. Here's Adel Makhroui with more.
From a frozen membership in 2013 to the chair of the African Union, in just a few years, Egypt has managed to entirely shift its relations with the continent. Though it's a somewhat routine selection, but to the Egyptian administration it reflects great political significance. Cairo has been widely celebrating this 2019 African chairing. All four main television networks merged their broadcast to make sure Egyptians won't miss the event.
Egypt has shifted its speeches in recent years to stress on its African roots and African identities. President Al-Sisi has started to launch events in Egypt, all focused on Africa. That has created awareness among Egyptians and gave opportunities for them to connect to Africans from many countries. Cairo has sent invitations to many African leaders. All of this has helped in Egypt's selection as chair.
Chairing the AU will help shed spotlight of Egypt's vision for the continent and put the country in the center of some important meetings this year. Cairo will soon bring African leaders together for the African Center for Post-Conflict Reconstruction and Development. Later in the year, Aswan City will host the African Forum for Peace and Development.
When interacting with African countries, Cairo approaches from a win-win perspective. There is no larger tone of superiority. Egypt sees itself more of an equal member among the other African nations that has created balance in our ties with them. This year should bring Egypt closer to the continent in all political and economic aspects.
Known for his timely, efficient accomplishments, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi may help move stagnant waters in key African issues. On Sunday, he has specified the 3 areas he'd like to focus on: to enhance African connectivity with a highway from Cairo to Cape Town and joining Lake Victoria to the Mediterranean Sea. El-Sisi hopes that in 2019, the first executive steps for the African Free Trade Zone could be agreed upon.
Cairo is aware that the challenges ahead of Africa are numerous, and most of which will not be resolved in 2019. Egypt, however, hopes it can help create a collaborative framework for the African Union to work on its future continental plans. Adel Makhroui, CGTN, Cairo.
On Somalia now, where a new policy has been unveiled to tackle the increasing number of displaced persons. Years of conflict and climate challenges has resulted in IDPs fleeing to major cities. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo has more.
These displaced persons are the latest to arrive in Mogadishu. They are fleeing conflict in southern Somalia as security forces flush out militants from their remaining strongholds. The Somali capital is home to more than 500,000 displaced persons fleeing conflict and climate change. Estimates indicate that up to 2 million people live in displacement camps all across the country. Authorities say the influx of IDPs in major cities remains a national issue.
Displacement of people is a national issue and one that must be addressed. Big cities including Mogadishu cannot withstand the influx of displaced persons. IDPs are entitled to basic human rights and we must work on the measures to ensure that they live a comfortable life in their region.
The mayor of Mogadishu, Abdurrahman Osman, recently unveiled the Banadir region's IDP policy that also applies to refugees and returnees who live in deplorable conditions in the camps.
Our vision is to have no IDPs in the city in the next 4 years. They will, however, be relocated to their homes and provided with much-needed support. It's for this reason that we have created a durable solution unit to implement this policy.
To see that the government has a document to show the direction to help the IDPs is very positive. That's the way forward. We need to move away from a humanitarian emergency response towards something durable.
Despite improved humanitarian conditions, experts warn that food insecurity will likely to remain the biggest threat facing Somalia in 2019. Recent estimates indicate that up to 4.2 million people, or a third of the country's total population, require urgent humanitarian support. Authorities and aid agencies have appealed for more than $500 million to sustain aid operations in Somalia for the next 12 months. Somalia remains one of the most complex and long-standing humanitarian crises in the world. Experts now say that resilience programs must be implemented to ensure that farmers and pastoralists survive future shocks and are not displaced from their regions again. Abdulaziz Bilal, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Nigerians are getting ready to vote for their next president. The polls are set to take place on February the 16th, with 71 candidates vying for the top position. Incumbent President Muhammadu Buhari is looking to gain his second term. His main competitor is Atiku Abubakar of the People's Democratic Party. Abubakar is a former vice president. Violence has taken place in the lead up to the polls, with an election office being set on fire over the weekend. The US and the UK have stated they will deny visas to anyone who instigates violence or poll rigging in the upcoming elections. Well, let's now cross over to Lagos, to Abuja, to find out how Nigeria's Electoral Commission is preparing for the polls. And I'm joined by Aliyu Bello. He's the Deputy Director and Head of Publicity at the Independent National Electoral Commission. Director, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. Now, how prepared is INEC though, for the upcoming election?
Thank you for having me. And I want to just confirm that the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, is fully prepared for the 2019 general elections. In fact, for the 16th February presidential National Assembly elections, 73 candidates are contesting the elections. And already the preparations are on about training and supply of all materials for the elections to various levels. And for now, the training of poll officials and the PVC collection is almost getting over. So by the 16th of February 2019, Nigerians that are eligible to vote in that election will exercise their franchise unimpeded and will have a free, fair and credible elections in 2019.
Well, Deputy Director, there are concerns that have been raised about the issuance of permanent voter cards. Is this likely to disenfranchise the voters?
Well, we don't see that happening, even as some Nigerians are yet to receive their PVCs, but I think they slept over their rights. This PVC collection have started long ago. We are only about concluding the exercise, mopping up the few that have not collected to now turn up a mass and receive their PVCs. This exercise has been done on continuous basis since the conclusion of the continuous voter registration. So for now, for us, the exercise should have concluded on the 8th of this month, but for obvious reasons, the Commission considered it wise enough and good enough to extend it with 3 days, 3 more days, that is ending today. So by now, I believe most Nigerians that have not collected their PVCs must have used the opportunity extended to them over the last 3 days to have done so.
Let's look at the question of insecurity, because insecurity has been rife in parts of Nigeria, particularly the northeast, and it is estimated that up to 3 million people have been displaced as a result of that insecurity. How is INEC handling that issue?
Yes, in some quarters, in some locations, there is some challenges, but it has drastically reduced. And what the Commission did to ensure that the franchise of those living in IDPs is not compromised is to work out a framework. The framework now permits those living in IDPs, that's internally displaced persons camp, those residents within the states they registered would have opportunity to elect all candidates at all levels. But those that have moved out of states where they registered, the framework provides that they will have opportunity to exercise their franchise in relation to election of the presidential candidates.
And we are also receiving some reports of some fire outbreaks in two areas, in two electoral commission offices, though the latest in Plateau State and earlier on in Abia. What is the likely impact of this at all?
That will not affect the elections. At the moment as we speak, none of the sensitive election materials is yet at the local government level. And these fire incidents happened in local government area offices. So what the local government area offices have is non-sensitive materials. So even where non-sensitive materials is involved in the fire incident, it is something that the Commission can at any time replace. So it will never ever affect the conduct of this election. So we don't wish to have fire anyway. But when it happened, the Commission would readily make arrangement to ensure that the material that have been gotten away by fire are replaced to ensure the conduct of the elections. So the ballot papers, the result sheets are not affected in this kind of incidents, because at the moment none of such materials is delivered to local government for whichever reasons. It has to be in a very secured place which the Commission is keeping safe. So towards election, it's only towards election that we move such sensitive materials to local government area offices.
All right, Aliyu Bello, the Deputy Director and Head of Publicity at the Independent National Electoral Commission of Nigeria. Thank you for joining us. You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. Algeria's ruling party picks incumbent Bouteflika as a candidate in the upcoming April election. And in South Sudan, the warring armed groups are in the process of turning into a unified army.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. But to get out, go there and you find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The situation at the Gloria coal mine in the Mpumalanga province of South Africa, where an explosion last week killed 6 people, remains unchanged. It is understood that there are still 22 people trapped underground. Angela Coppola reports from the mine.
Rescue efforts at the mine have been thwarted since Friday, with Gloria mine employees refusing to let rescue teams do their work.
There have been high-level meetings all weekend, which we've attended, with the MECs and then with the Chief Inspector of Mines. Everybody's been trying to say to them, let's continue with the rescue operation. And at this point in time, the employees are not allowing us to continue.
Miners are unclear about the identity of those currently trapped on the ground, although the South African police say that 3 of the deceased are Lesotho nationals and the 4th is a South African.
I'm not sure the present moment, is it thieves or is it people who are hungry, or is it mine workers? They are hungry because they never get paid for the past 4 months.
The business rescue practitioners say they have paid the contractors who will go in and get the infrastructure repaired, but only once their safety is assured.
We've got everybody on standby at this point in time for the minute we get given the go-ahead that it's going to be safe, and we've got a guarantee on the people's safety. We'll be there, we'll erect the poles that are required, install the cables, bring the big transformer which we've borrowed from on at Colliery now, and then we will start sucking the poisonous air out of the mine. Fresh air replaces the poisonous air, and then we can send the rescue teams underground to go and recover the personnel that are underground.
The situation remains tense, with family members of those trapped underground on one side of the mine and miners on the other side. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Mpumalanga, South Africa.
To Algeria now, and incumbent President Abdelaziz Bouteflika has been picked by the ruling FLN party as the presidential flag bearer in the upcoming elections. Bouteflika has been in power since 1999. Here are the details.
At 81 years old, President Abdelaziz Bouteflika has been in power for 20 years. In 2013, he suffered a stroke that confined him to a wheelchair. However, his party leadership says he is the ideal candidate for the April elections.
I am honored to announce that the National Liberation Front has chosen the fighter Abdelaziz Bouteflika as a candidate.
He stood up and brought prosperity to Algeria. He was happy with us and we want to be happy with him. We wish him a quick recovery.
The people want this. We have a message for him, which is to run again. He guarantees continuity, reconciliation, and success.
Bouteflika's poor health has been a subject of political debates in the North African state. His nomination is expected to put the question of his candidacy to rest. However, he will need a formal announcement from his party before the 3rd of March to be confirmed as a presidential candidate. The oil-producing Algeria is a member of OPEC. Europe and the US are the main importers of its oil and gas. The country has also emerged as a key ally of the West in the fight against terrorism in the Maghreb region. Al-Satal, CGTN.
Demonstrations in Sudan continue for a 3rd month. Youth are calling for better living conditions and freedom of expression. However, these are just but among the many reasons behind the riots. Yasser Hakim looks at the reasons behind the unrest and implications on Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir.
Demonstrations have been triggered by austerity measures that lifted subsidies on food and energy. The devaluation of the Sudanese pound led to acute inflation and price hikes that pushed the predominantly poor population into the streets.
The price of a load of bread reached £3, and that is if you actually find any food in the market. This led the youth to campaign on Facebook and on the streets for the president to step down. More than 50 youth were martyred in the unrest.
To appease demonstrators, Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir formed an investigation team to bring to justice those responsible for the killing of demonstrators. He ordered the release of jailed journalists and raised wages by up to 55%.
We are opening a new chapter, a new beginning for a better economy. I'm not saying we'll prosper overnight, but by Almighty, our plan is set. Our vision is clear and we will overcome this tough period together. I promise that every Sudanese will have the best living conditions he would wish for. Together, we will overcome this crisis and become even stronger.
His promises fell on deaf ears. Demonstrations have continued, though at a smaller scale. The slogan now is freedom, peace and justice, an indication that demands are not only related to cost of living, but a new leadership.
The Sudanese president is taking the slow and patient approach. He is buying time to prolong his grip on power and diffuse the revolt. But so far, the youth and more segments of the society, except the Islamists, are not backing down.
There are no signs that demonstrations can end anytime soon. Some experts believe that stability can be restored if President al-Bashir takes comprehensive measures, such as changing the government or calling for early presidential elections. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
In neighboring South Sudan, the country is undertaking the tough task of implementing the latest peace deal. Warring armed groups are currently in the process of turning into a unified army. Ashtatal has more on the security challenges facing South Sudan.
In 3 months, soldiers who once fought against each other will need to become the unified South Sudanese army. This is part of a peace deal signed by President Salva Kiir and his former deputy-turned-rival, Riek Machar. According to the deal, the unity government cannot be formed until the armed forces are unified. Opposition parties have agreed to establish 25 cantonment sites, or military quarters, for all the warring factions.
When we finish graduation, when we finish putting them in the cantonment site, they'll be taken to the unified training centers, which is yet to be established. Then from there, they'll be graduated and deployed.
The country's main opposition group has noted their satisfaction with the progress. But funding shortages are limiting the country's ability to properly reform its security services.
There is a political will to implement the agreement. So I'm still very optimistic about this peace agreement. There are challenges, if I told you, the challenge of the funding.
According to the UN mission in South Sudan, around 190,000 internally displaced persons are currently living in its compounds. Filling the funding gap would help the government to train its security forces to help repatriate the thousands of IDPs. Astatal, CGTN.
Teachers in Zimbabwe are back at work after calling off a strike, which began on February the 5th. Unions representing teachers issued a statement urging their members to return to work as they are set to continue negotiations with the government.
Teachers suspended the strike following crisis meetings with government officials over the weekend, which renewed confidence that some of their sector-specific demands will be met. Educators had embarked on the job action to press for higher pay, but unions representing them say they are now in discussions for other non-monetary incentives.
We seem to have secured agreement from the Minister of Primary and Secondary Education, the Public Service Commission, as well as Treasury, who were represented and present in the past 2 days as we engaged. And there's a commitment to say, let us try this, have a trial run and have a dialogue at education sector level. So we are going to try this through the crisis talks that we are going to be having, hopefully beginning this week, so that we can see what allowances can quickly be paid.
They have not ruled out a resumption of the strike action should this latest round of talks fail. Zimbabwe civil servants have been asking for higher pay in the face of rising inflation, which recently hit a 10-year high. Zimbabwe's government has introduced spending cuts and plans to trim the civil service as part of austerity measures meant to trigger economic recovery. CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
You're watching breaking news on CGTN.
recap now of the headlines this hour. The African Union Heads of State Summit has concluded in the Ethiopian capital, Addis Ababa. Leaders have called for an end to forced displacements and durable solutions to the refugee situation on the continent. The leaders have also agreed to scale up efforts of combating the threat of terrorism in the Sahel and Lake Chad regions and the continent at large. They have also committed to supporting peacekeeping missions and the operationalization of the Africa Humanitarian Agency. These are some of the issues that will top the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's tenure as the chairman of the continental body. The situation at the Gloria coal mine in the Mpumalanga province of South Africa, where an explosion last week killed 6 people, remains unchanged. It is understood that there are still 22 people trapped underground. Algeria's incumbent president Abdelaziz Bouteflika has been picked by the ruling FLN party as the presidential flag bearer in the upcoming elections. However, he will need a formal announcement from his party before the 3rd of March to be confirmed as a presidential candidate. Bouteflika has been in power since 1999. And South Sudan is undertaking the tough task of implementing the latest peace deal. Warring armed groups are currently in the process of turning into a unified army. South Sudan's warring armed groups are in the process of turning now into a unified army. And that's a look at your headlines. Well, let's now go to Uche Okoronkwo for the latest business news. Uche.
Thanks, Beatrice. And coming up on Africa Live Biz, Kenya joins the ranks of leading global tea exporters. And South Africa's power supply troubles deepen as Eskom announces further load shedding.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll set up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sumitra Naidu. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off in Kenya. The country's tea exports have soared higher than that of India, and that's despite accounting for 13% of the world's production with Sri Lanka. Now, India's tea manufacturers and stakeholders have expressed indignation at the combined increase of tea exports, having a joint share of 39%, while India is 13%. Now, some of the officials attributed the drop to price and less orders from traditional markets like Russia and UAE. According to the Secretary General of TAI, tea gardens are now dependent on domestic consumption. Meanwhile, in South Africa, the struggling state power utility Eskom has implemented 2 separate stages of load shedding across the country. The reductions follow President Cyril Ramaphosa's announcement that Eskom was going to be split into 3 entities. Here's CGTN's Angelo Coppola with the latest.
The load shedding comes just days after South African President Cyril Ramaphosa announced that the utility was going to be split into 3 units. The country also experienced load shedding on Sunday.
We had additional units tripping, meaning that we had to escalate stages of load shedding to where we are now, which is stage 4 of load shedding, which is happening for the first time in, I think, about 8 years now.
There are several reasons that Eskom finds itself in this current situation.
Operationally, they've got big problems on the old units, which they haven't maintained properly, and they haven't done the midlife refurbishments. And secondly, on the new units, they seem to have design and performance issues, major. I mean, we're talking about 80% failure.
Eskom has reportedly been using its open cycle gas turbines consistently, which is hugely expensive.
They've now been using the OCGTs for the last 2 or 3 months, flat out, and my calculations indicate that's close to R1 billion a month that they're burning just on the diesel side.
Eskom says that the cost of diesel is negligible compared to the cost of the country's economy. If there's no electricity, the economy is estimated to lose around $150 million a day if there's no power.
Over the last few months at least, we have spent so far about just less than R1 billion to buy diesel. So quite frankly, if we have to mitigate against the risk of load shedding, and it means that we have to spend money on diesel, we would rather go there than to have the economy suffering as it is at the moment.
The prognosis for more load shedding is dire at the moment, and we're likely to see this carry on until April at least. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And to Zimbabwe now, teachers have called off a strike which began on February 5th over pay, and they will be returning to work by Tuesday. Now, teachers' unions met Education Minister Paul Mavima in Harare and agreed on a return to work formula. Well, teachers, like other public sector workers, are demanding US dollar salaries and an increase in allowances to cushion them against soaring inflation as well as economic hardship. According to the labor unions, the strike was marred by intimidation from military officials as well as politicians. There are more than 100,000 public sector teachers in Zimbabwe. Unions say 80% of them are on strike. Now, according to the Zimbabwe Teachers Association and the Progressive Teachers Union, failure by the government to meet their demands will see teachers going back on strike. And in Egypt, the annual consumer price inflation has declined to 12.2% in January 2019. That's compared to 17% in January 2018. Now, back in December, the annual inflation level reached about 11.1% compared to 22.3% in the same month of 2017. According to the Central Agency for Public Mobilization and Statistics, inflation has accelerated by 0.8% in January, recording 298.8 points. That's compared to 296.5 points in December 2018. Now, CAPMAS attributed the hike in inflation on a monthly basis to the increase of some commodity prices, as vegetable prices rose by 3.9% and cereals and bread by 1.8%. The International Monetary Fund expects inflation to decline to 20.9% in 2018 compared to 23.5% in 2017, anticipating it to reach 14% in 2019 and 7% in 2023. Now, inflation has surged since the flotation of the Egyptian pound back in 2016, reaching a high record level in July due to energy subsidy cuts. And staying in Egypt, the country has taken over the one-year presidency of the African Union at the AU summit in Addis Ababa. Yasser Hakim looks at what Egypt hopes to achieve on the economic front as the new head of the AU.
In his latest statements before leaving for Addis Ababa, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi stressed that the African economy is one of his main priorities. Cairo hopes the long-sought dream of a continental free trade area will be adopted during its term. So far, only 18 out of 49 members have ratified the treaty. It needs 22 states to be put into effect.
Unfortunately, the inter-African trade at present is only 14%. The rest is still be done with the former colonial powers and others. We'd like to increase this area to have all Africa included and to encourage partners in order to have an agreement with this continental grouping for investment, finance, technical assistance, transfer of technology, and this will allow more interactive between African peoples, not only the business people.
For many businessmen, the continent lacks vital components to upscale its investments.
Africa needs a lot of energy in the coming years, and infrastructure especially. And Egypt has already done major steps in this respect. since 2014 till now, Egypt has gone a long way in different infrastructure projects and renewable energy. So we can make use of Egypt's experience in this respect to different African countries.
Egypt will also resume outgoing AU chair Namibia's efforts in restructuring the AU setup and membership regulations to raise more sources of income for the organization. However, experts believe the main target should always be the African citizen.
Africa for a long time now is suffering from the poverty problem. Many Africans are still under the poverty line, recognized by the international community. That's why we'd like to devise a plan in order to make the governments concerned encourage involvement of women, youth, and the private sector, and so on, in order to uplift this poverty, which is affecting the social fabric of many countries.
This is the fourth time that Egypt resides over the AU, and most experts believe it's a pivotal period. Africa needs to develop its economies that have lagged far behind other continents. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, the head of the International Monetary Fund says trade between the UK and the European Union will become more difficult, whatever the outcome of Brexit negotiations. Now, this week, UK Prime Minister Theresa May is expected to announce that she will call for another parliamentary debate on the Brexit deal by February 27th. As the clock ticks down to Britain's scheduled exit on March 29th, May continues her effort to persuade the EU to change the deal that, of course, was agreed between London and Brussels late last year. The agreement was overwhelmingly rejected by the UK Parliament in January.
Whether it ends well, whether there is a smooth exit even by custom unions, as predicated by some, or whether it's as a result of a brutal, exit on March 29th without extension of notice, it's not going to be as good as it is now, because there will be additional friction, because there will be unnecessary, there will be required procedures, there will be lines.
And moving on now, with an aging workforce and rise in chronic diseases, Singapore has been grappling with a severe manpower crunch. This, of course, has led to a push towards automation in the country. Well, CGTN's Miro Liu takes a look at some of the latest robots being created in the city-state in order to help businesses manage their human resources.
So sorry, but you're in my way. Could you please move?
Don't be surprised if you see this robot cleaning your office buildings, shopping malls and airports in Singapore. By April this year, the first 100 LeoBot scrub will be deployed to commercial cleaning companies. The bot can scrub any type of floor and is always cheerful and pleasant.
Hickory dickory dock, the mouse ran up the clock. The clock struck 3 and he needed to play. Hickory dickory dock.
As tall as an average 6-year-old, it's designed to be efficient, compact, and nimble. It can easily go through small doors and get into confined spaces. But instead of selling it at exorbitant prices, its creators at LionSpot plan to rent it out as part of their robot-as-a-service model. Dr. Mohan Rajesh Ilara is a professor at the Singapore University of Technology and Design and one of the brains behind LeoBot.
While it is on a rental service, it makes it more affordable for these contractors to purchase them in large numbers, and also they can relinquish on maintenance issue because maintenance could be handled by, in this case, by LionSpot. We can provide the maintenance support, so it's light on the customer's end.
This is Strobo. He was instantly famous because of his role as the Robo-Cop from the ASEAN Summit held in Singapore last November. Don't be fooled by its adorable shape and size. It is equipped with facial recognition, a built-in GPS, along with 6 cameras to allow a complete 360-degree view of its surroundings.
It's able to actually listen for distress call, for example, and the robot knows exactly where is the call coming from.
Currently being tested at Gardens by the Bay, its biggest advantage is that it can patrol long distances without getting tired, like its human colleagues, and can cover secluded areas and CCTV blind spots.
Excuse me, ma'am, do you need any assistance?
While this robot is performing time-consuming and laborious work, human officers are free to focus their time on more crucial and specialized tasks. Singapore has been encouraging automation in businesses. The city-state committed $450 million to the National Robotics Program in 2016. National Trades Union Congress looks after workers' interests in Singapore. Assistant Secretary General Zainal Supari told CGTN that they're not worried about machines taking over human jobs. Instead, the trade union encourages workers to upskill and improve their employability.
Really equipping our workers with the necessary skills for them to be ready, more resilient, as well as relevant. This could include equipping them with the necessary IT skills, with the necessary adaptive skills.
Unlike the rest of the world, robots in Singapore are not seen as a threat, but a necessity. They're being deployed in a wide range of areas from hospitals to hotels. And with technology getting cheaper and more accessible, it would be safe to assume that robots will certainly be a huge part of Singapore's future. Mirulu, CGTN, Singapore.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up on Global Business Africa, South Africa sinks further into a power crisis, and that's after Eskom loses more generating capacity. All that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you, Beatrice.
Uche, thank you. And do stay with us as we still have more news, views, and analysis for you on the program. Don't go away.
Join us for Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's go to Burkina Faso, where an exhibition on pre-digital era music technology has been on display since February the 2nd, 2019. The exhibition, which will end on February the 16th, aims to bring the history of Burkina Faso's music industry to life in the community.
Old is gold is what exhibitors here were trying to promote. From vinyl records, cassettes, and CDs, visitors got a chance to connect with the past. Organized by Sedoni Production, a pioneering company in the music industry in Burkina Faso, the exhibition was also an opportunity to discuss the impact of these older music technologies on artistic productions.
10 or 15 years ago, everyone swore by these methods. They were tapes and CDs. CDs were something luxurious, by the way, while tapes were more popular for the ordinary customer. Nowadays, to see that all this is obsolete and that it is no longer being done at the moment, one can only think of how time flies. But at the same time, it's a connection to the past. So it's a part of our history that we're rewinding.
Back in the days, things were a lot harder. It wasn't easy at all to be an artist. You could start a career one day, but it took a long time to become a certified artist. Today, things are different. You can even become an artist right here, right now. You can make music today and start using it tomorrow.
The Burkinabe authorities here pointed toward the importance of older technologies in the popularization of cultural values while encouraging growth of the digital age.
Music is a key component of our identity. Thus, so is everything that contributes to it and plays a major role in the preservation of Burkinabe culture. Without these older tools, music wouldn't be. When we shift to the new digital era, we have a duty to remember those who engaged and invested in this field. That is somewhat obsolete today. They have paved the way to technological innovation. They must also adapt to this new climate.
In Burkina Faso, Sedoni Productions' first tape was manufactured in December 1998 in a tape factory which still holds great historical value. However, with the current trends overtaking the industry, it is easy to see how the evolution in technology has affected the production and delivery of music. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead. South Africa's Special Olympics team preparing for the Games to be held in March in Abu Dhabi.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way.
Match Point, only on CGTN.